question and answer session. So anybody who has a question, please be sure to direct it to the relevant presenter, and where if that is not possible, you can float it as a general question that may be picked up by one of the three of them.
In regards to the presentation made by Mary, it is prudent that regulations be put across so that they can be able to address some of these the society ills that impede the youth in regards to protecting them and providing strategic solutions so that even during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, they can be able to access justice in a suitable manner. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the presenters for such rich presentations. I'll be brief. I just needed clarifications. For the first presentation, no, the second one on what Kituo did, I know the life of strategic litigation in this country could take as long as, it's years on end for those of us who are interested in such. So in light of SL cases that came up during the pandemic, I was quite interested to just know how much time it took and whether whatever pronouncements or orders that came out of court were effective to address the immediate needs, because we're looking at a rapid response mechanism of some sort that was urgent in light of the pandemic. And then to my senior, Dr. Gendi, that was really good. I really enjoyed the presentation. Maybe just a clarification. I don't understand the scope of, maybe I didn't hear the scope of your research, but it would be interesting to see whether access to justice in regard to health during the pandemic and what your focus was on took into consideration other emerging health issues such as mental health or HIV and communicable diseases, which are serious but weren't necessarily given the focus they need. But it could be, not relevant to your research. So I'm just wondering.
I just have a brief reaction to Madam Mary's presentation and maybe a clarification. You have talked about the social security system in Kenya. I didn't get it very clear. Is it that what we have is not adequate, or is it not properly administered or managed? For example, recently I was listening to the radio. There is this stipend which is given to the old people. They get about 2,000, is it 2,000 or 4,000 a month? Now, the receiving point, these are old, vulnerable, but at the receiving point, they're asked to fill some forms to enable them get paid. That is when their details are captured. But then they're asked to pay 200 shillings. So now, do you ask someone to pay so that you can also pay? I didn't get that. And then, when you look at the systems that we have those who are employed, they can join the institutions that are administered by the Retirement Benefits Authority. Then we have NSSF. NSSF, if you look at the papers, sometimes they advertise and they say, we have thousands of checks of retired people who have never come to pick them. And I know the youths who are not, the people who are not employed, who are self-employed, they have the opportunity to join NSSF. But then taking the example of that you have given about the youths that you gave jobs, you were paying them 450, or the government was paying, not you are like, sorry for that correction, 450 shillings per day. Sometimes this work is not available on a daily basis. And we understand the COVID situation which came in. Now, they can register with the NSSF and contribute. But recently, the contribution to NSSF, right, from this financial year. By an individual, the minimum contribution is 760. Will these people afford? Are we talking about the issue of management, effectiveness, or inadequacy in these social security systems that we have in Kenya? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for your presentation. My question is on this program known as Kazi kwa Vijana. I was listening to President Uhuru Kenyatta address during Mashujaa when he said that the second phase is about to be, money was allocated for the second phase, which is about to start. But my question is on the first phase. Did you have, as a government, did you have any criteria that you were using to recruit these youth into this program? And if at all, what was the criterion in the recruitment process of those youths who are given slots or openings in this program? Thank you.
One is to add to what Mary said. I know in the NGO sector, in the last 5 years, they have moved towards a cash-based intervention because not only is it cheaper for the organization, but it also gives dignity to the beneficiaries. And in terms of, in Kenya, because of the use of M-Pesa, during drought response, beneficiaries don't have to line up and they're given maize and beans, as long as markets within the areas are still thriving, you can still be able to send M-Pesa to the beneficiaries' wallets. And actually the NGO world is moving away from response to resilience. So for me, I think that's where the NGO and the government partnership should come in. So that the government plays their part in resilience as the NGO world deals with the response.
I want to provide an LSK perspective to an issue that came from the floor for the reason that I'm a member of the LSK Public Interest Litigation Committee, so I am privy to some facts that I can share with the plenary. This is with regards to the time it takes for a matter to be filed and decision to be rendered. I was very much involved with the curfew cases and a couple of cases filed with regards to the initial COVID cases, including the burial one. Ogende, I think you helped us with the burial one in Kisumu. It depends with the court station, such that in Nairobi, for example, where we have very proactive and quick judges, you will get decisions very quickly, and that is barring any intervention. So you may get a decision within a month or two of filing. In some matters, like the Karibangi case that we touched on, we are still at the interlocutory stage. The matter was coming up last week on the 25th. They were in court for further directions. And this was a matter that was filed last year. So it depends on a case-by-case matter and in the context, barring the intervention of other parties.
I'd like to add to that as I also respond to the sub-question. For time it takes, I just wanted to give a practical example. On the e-filing case, it was filed on 27th November 2020, and the judgment was given on 14th October 2021. So that's like 11 months, and that is from time it was filed. So it takes,
Do you feel like it's effective to take any?
Okay. She's asking, do I feel that it's effective for a decision to take that time to be passed? let me also give another scenario of where we actually filed some other cases as Kituo, and then they immediately find, especially during the pandemic when things were just changing, after a few months, there's a new order, that one is not effective anymore. So you filed this, all of a sudden, it has been overtaken by events. Okay, so now you just let it go at that point. So I can say to some extent it is effective. And I think 1 year in Kenya, we're just having that conversation with you of how long it usually takes if you want to pursue the formal judicial system, how long it usually takes. So looking at it from that perspective of our history, I think 1 year, it shows a bit of diligence.
Or probably it just depends on the orders you were seeking, because if it was not such an emergency, then 1 year would be pretty good.
Yes, yes, that's true. Okay, if that is how you wanted effectiveness. I thought by effectiveness you meant the effectiveness of strategic litigation in general.
In terms of justice, for justice to be effective, it has to be timely. So it depends on the orders that you're actually seeking at that time.
Yes, sure.
Thank you for the comments and the questions. On the programs, the social security programs, Mr. Getanda, the programs are, as I highlighted, the government need a lot of budget. It's a budget issue. So we cannot say they are enough. They are inadequate, such that they are taking care of a special, maybe one portion of the population. Like, for example, I highlighted there is no specific program for unemployed youths. We have a lot of graduates. So what the government so far has not been able to take care of those university graduates, diploma graduates who graduate and they have not been absorbed by the economy. So is there some stipend to caution them? We don't have. And I gave an example. That's why the current campaigns that you see around, the youths are being promised that they are going to be paid. That's a real example. So the programs are very effective. If you have experienced NHIF, if it has paid, it can pay up to 1.5 million maybe for a certain cover. That is an effective way. And NSSF the same. We have recorded benefits of those people who have been able to get the benefits on the same. Cash transfer is, according to me, among the programs that we have implemented, is among the best programs, because this money is going directly to the beneficiaries, to the elderly persons, directly. They are paid directly. The orphans and vulnerable children, we also have other programs like the presidential bursaries for total orphans, which take care of even up to 30,000 for a total orphan. So about the elderly being asked to fill papers and maybe being asked for some money to pay, the programs are free of charge. And maybe where you may not miss a few instances, maybe where they are being asked and they are not required to pay any fee for them to be enrolled to the program. About filling of the papers, all the elderly persons are encouraged to have caregivers. Caregivers are those who can help them to process. About Kazi Mtaani, second phase, he asked about the first phase, how did we enroll? The first phase, which started in May last year, it was a Nyumba Kumi setup, whereby sub-location, which is our lowest unit of administration, you divide into villages, all blocks, because this is an urban setup. Within this, for example, in Flamingo Estate, we have about 1,300 households. Within that area, the people within that area are the ones who are supposed to identify who among us are the most needy, who have been more affected than the others. And I gave an example of a lady who the community gave us. He told us, we are tired of giving this lady food. Can you take her and enroll into the program? So it's supposed to be that Nyumba Kumi cluster. A cluster consists of households because not all of them can be absorbed, but it's upon them to tell us who are the most needed. However, I would see some instances where there was chiefs who were accused of giving that to their relatives. We are not blind to that, and we were able to change over because the Ministry of Housing, we were able to when we audited the list, we found a few. We would remove them from the system, and then we go back to the community. They give us the rightful candidates, and we enroll them. So, according to me, if the government can be able to move along, as Madam is talking about, that is the way to go. If you want a certain population of a community to benefit, let them get the money directly, having learned from the previous program that the government has been implementing. Thank you so much. I think I've highlighted some of those issues.
Thanks. Brian? But you people look very sleepy. And I'm wondering why the seats are empty. Is it because you knew we were going to start with gender? There was a time I was called to train some peacekeepers at the AU. And when my session for gender came, there were very few generals in the room. I had to go out to persuade them to come. I told them that gender is another synonym for human rights. So I was not going to attack them in any way. So they came back into the room, but they were very sad. I could read I could see a funeral procession on their faces. So please don't give me that look, because it concerns all of us. My name is Ruth. I'm going to present this paper on behalf of Dr. Parsitau. And I teach gender. And that's why I was complaining 15 minutes is not enough to unpack gender. So this is the way my presentation is going to go. I will just start by a small way of introducing the gendered impacts of COVID-19. Then I'll give a brief information to how the theoretical framework we are using for the analysis, and then why the need for a gender perspective. Why not the masculine approach or human rights approach? And then, by way of description, I try to bring out the gendered impacts in about 5 thematic areas. And then I'll end with conclusion. First of all, when I started, I told you how people really frown about gender. Yet, without trying to understand gender, our world will be a total disaster. And because we have a wrong conception about gender, it is always good to bring it out in a manner that is not threatening, because I think sometimes when you see gender, all you see is a very aggressive woman, anti-men, anti-boys, and it's just a woman and girl focused. Please, that is far from it. When you talk about gender, it includes both men and women. And the reason why we emphasize on women is because the society in which we live in treats us differently. And of course, informed by our social norms, which always elevate the man and treats the woman with a lot of inferiority. And we all believe that one thing that is common between a woman and a girl, a man and a boy, is the word MA at the end. So maybe we should change the WO and do something else, and also use the E on the end to have a different meaning, so you can understand that we are talking about humanity, not about a woman, not about a man, but all we are looking for is social justice, equality between the two sexes. So back to COVID-19, I'll just let you know that COVID-19 has affected men and boys, women and girls alike. However, and please mark, however, the comma, girls and women have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic based on the social construction of the roles that these two individuals perform in the society. How their social status is designed, their political status, economic, and even legal status. And because of those bifurcations, we'll always find that it is always empowering the man, but disempowering the woman. And this is something that is deeply rooted in culture, that even us as women, and even me included as I speak here, in my subconscious mind, I find myself doing the things that I tell young girls, you should not do this, you know? So if it is deeply ingrained in me, and I'm someone who understands the gendered nature of the society, then you can imagine what Brian will think, what Evans will think, what Mr. Kiyoko there will think, what Wahu will think, what Valerie will think, you know? So we need to have a common understanding of the term or the gendered nature of the society to be able to understand how we can then allocate duties that do not empower the man and disempower the woman. I'm not going to delve into the roles because those roles is not going to be deeply engaging today, but it will in the full paper. But I refer to them briefly to make us understand. The role of a woman is that one of caring, reproduction, and production, and community work. While for the man, it's more of leadership and productive work. But when it comes to productive work, again, it's at a different level for women. And we find the ones that the woman is doing, or the ones that are socially constructed for the woman, are strenuous, and they confine the woman. And because they're confining, it therefore means she has very limited opportunity to grow and even challenge the system. So somehow she will always operate to maintain the status quo because she does not want to rock the boat. And those who attempt to rock the boat are always labeled as feminists, lesbians, broken girls from broken families. And that is far from it because of our misunderstanding of the word gender. For me here, I'll just go straight to the gender. I'm not going to read the slides. I've already given you the background, but I've already explained that because of the gendered nature of the society, girls and women have been disproportionately affected by COVID. And these effects kind of make those who are making decisions that affect the lives of girls and women lose the focus into what is best for a woman, what is best for a girl, and what it is best for a man. And the reason is that they're hardly there at the table where decisions are made. And even if they're there, sometimes they're treated as flower girls. So they cannot influence key policy strategies that can be used to respond to disasters such as COVID-19. Now, in 2020, when the UN and UNFPA took a study just to survey how far or how disproportionately women and girls were affected by the COVID, they actually found out that in Sub-Saharan Africa, just to mention countries like South Africa, Tanzania, Kenya, Senegal, Mali, it revealed that women were the hardest hit by COVID-19, and they were actually bearing the brunt of COVID-19. And I'm going to demonstrate that shortly. As you can see, and I'll use an example for Egerton University, we have some workers there. I think they are outsourced. And the majority of them actually women. They're the ones who do the cleaning. Immediately, the university was closed, or there was minimum activity at the university. Most of these workers were pushed out. Why? Because there are no students, workers are few in the compound, and because they are not mainstream workers of the university, they are to be let go. And it's not just Egerton University, many other institutions. I'm just giving an example because this is an experience that I can confirm. Even in some offices where I'm privy to or have some relationship with, I saw most of the people who are being laid off were women. And the reason was because they usually, you see at the apex of the pyramid, you have the tip there, people who influence decisions on who is supposed to go, who is supposed to be retained, are usually, again, men. So you find more women at the bottom of the pyramid, and the work that they are doing can quite easily be dispensed with. And then, of course, when you lay her off, something happens. She loses the income, she goes home, and that has implications for her. She cannot fend for herself. And remember, even the little income that she had that put on a springboard to kind of negotiate certain things that she can do within her own space at the family level is also taken away. Leave alone that is always limited. So I am saying that because I want us to go to the national. So if the decision is limited at home, how then do you expect it to be better at the clan level, at the community level, at the county level, at the national level? And remember, during COVID-19, This is the worst time when people were locked down with a lot of mental challenges, a lot of health issues. And again, we know in the society, when a woman is within the home, when there are many challenges, like people are sick, like Dr. Geni said, he did not focus on mental issues and other related health things that I think he discussed in his paper. I wasn't there, but I came in when he was talking about the mental health. Those people are never taken care of by our brothers, by our fathers, by our grandfathers. The person who takes care of such people are the women. So remember, I've lost my job as a woman. I've increased work, which is affecting me within the family space, because I've to, whether I've been sacked or not, when there's a sick family, a sick member of the family, you have to always negotiate, because Mr. Kiyoko will just leave and say, oh, I'm late for work. He will not stop to think that there's Ruth here who is either the spouse. I also need to go to work, because traditionally it's our work to take care of small things in the family, because that is always considered small things, and it is the work of a woman. So of course you can imagine, and also again from my own experience, please don't come because I've not even started. And I'm also going to use the power of the pen. Brian, please, will you just give me 5 minutes, please? I was just trying to introduce so that setting the context. But if you want me, I'll rush. Okay. All right. All right. I'll keep the intro. I'll go why gender perspective. And before I go to gender perspective, I'll tell you that I was using a theoretical framework called the gender perspective, and then also intersectional analysis. And why those theories? I've already told you the world is gendered, and the way duties are allocated depends on who wields power in the society, who controls resources, and who allocates these resources. Okay? And because there's already a way that society is layered, some who have the power, some who don't have the power. So you'll find most of the times, because of the division within which the society is, these divisions always create discrimination, they create oppression, and they also create privileges. So those ones who are privileged will always oppress those who have less power, and hence discrimination. And if I'm privileged, there is no way you'll expect me to think of the person who is oppressed, because at the end of the day, I need this person who is oppressed to exact my privilege. So even if I want to make a decision, I find them as insignificant, because I want the status quo to be maintained. Because if there's any change that is brought, it is going to affect the privileged person, then will always bring excuses. And it is these excuses which we have that has made women and the girls' voices not to be integrated in interventions that have been undertaken by government and even international community to respond, to COVID-19 issues. So unless we understand the diversity in the society and how these diversities again contribute, to developing or creating oppression and privileges, we can never come to understand gender. And when I talk about privileges, you know who privileges is allocated and who is oppressed. Unless we understand the needs of a woman, we'll never come up with a policy that will address the nitty-gritties that needs to empower her, even in terms of responding to COVID-19. Unless also we understand the needs of a man, we'll never have targeted interventions that address men's issues. So it is always important to have a gender perspective that considers both men and women, because gender is not about women, it is about men and women and how the society, treats them in terms of distribution of resources, in terms of control of the resources, and in terms of giving them a voice or getting to listen to their problems. And it becomes important for us to understand gender because it brings three pillars where we know the subordination of women lies, and that is the social, economic, and the political. Now, at the very beginning, I said women, the society is bifurcated into two, men and women, and the men have the privilege, women don't have the privilege. And I'm going to just rush now. These are the five categories, six categories that I was going to highlight in this presentation. And the reason why I'm going to highlight them, it's because I know men are sexually harassed. I know men can be raped. A few have been raped, and I know some of them that have been raped. I know men who are also beaten in their homes. But women, and I told you, women. And because when we are making policies, we don't look at a few fish in the pond, we look at the larger picture in the ocean. You can't make policies for ponds, but at least you'll make a policy for the ocean because you know there's something critical in that ocean. And you must take care of everything in that ocean. So because women are the ones who are affected largely by domestic violence or generally violence, regardless of whatever type. If it is domestic violence, if it is intimidation, it is sexual harassment, it is women. We know during COVID-19, how this was manifested was there was so much pressure in the home. People are not used to staying in the houses for 24 hours, 7 days during the lockdown. And because of the people staying together all the time, tensions were always created within families. So we found more women being beaten for small things, including even when there's not enough salt in the food. Very simple and useless excuses as such. Just for someone to vent, to let out the pressure brought about by COVID-19. And then, of course, in some areas where interventions were being made for in terms of distribution of food, or even I know people were even being asked to have sex because the vaccines were not readily available, but if you needed, if you provided something, quid pro quo, then you can get it. And then I'm saying, is it a privilege to be a woman or privilege to be a man? Privilege in terms of, if you can't get this and I have it, you can provide little things for me like sex, I'll give it to you. I cannot go to Evans there or Mr. Getanda there and tell them, because we are having this conference, if you want to attend to the last day, then we must do something special when in the absence of the others. It doesn't happen. But we always find that those things happen within our small spaces where we come from. And don't be ashamed, because I want you to know that if those such things happen, I even know some institution where some senior people pretend that they're going to do some official work, and then along the way they entice these small girls and some senior ladies and then they harass them, because they're their bosses. So those things happened during COVID. So if you needed favor, you needed to offer one way or the other. If you can't, if you respond in a negative way to someone within the family, and because the tension is already high, then of course it will provoke a beating. And I could go on, and I can't stop. I'm going to just stop there by highlighting. In terms of education, I wanted to tell you, when the schools were closed down, most of the girls and the boys that came back home, you found that the girls now were turned into taking care of people who are sick, taking care of little siblings or brothers, so they didn't have time to read. And even if they had time to read, they were always distracted, either by certain family members or cousins staying around, or people in the village. And you know what I'm going to talk about, again, sexual favors. And you know how many, and I'm not going to discuss teenage pregnancies because it was discussed at length yesterday. I will not repeat it. Now, because we're not going to school, and because of these unnecessary distractions from our brothers, we found our young girls, getting into activities which they would ordinarily not be part of if they were in school. And again, in terms of just learning, girls were disproportionately affected in terms of education by virtue of the technological gadgets that they were using, especially in the rural areas. And even if they needed to, and this, it's not only about in the rural areas, even in towns, they were not able to access some of the gadgets. And because they could not access, some people would use that avenue again to take advantage of them to make it available. And there are so many others which I can't list now, and I'm going to skip teenage pregnancies. In terms of care, I've already explained that there was increased work for women when COVID pandemic emerged. And the reason for the increased work is because everyone was in the house, and it doubled the work that the woman had to do. Ordinarily, in the morning, Francis here would go to work, so he'll not be available to take 10 o'clock tea. He may not be asking for water all the time, because we ordinarily don't we don't want to stand and go for water. We would rather send the little boys or the ladies in the house to go and get it. Okay? And then because of the large number of people in the house, so it means cooking more food for lunch, breakfast, in the evening. And of course, as I already explained, which I'm not going to repeat, taking care of the sick people. And in course of taking care of the sick people, they also got infected. Employment, I think I will skip. Employment, I told you, most women lost their jobs. And if you look at the ILO trends, in job loss, 2020 report, 2021, you will see a huge data, which I've not brought here. And women are the ones who are mostly affected. And of course, with loss of job, then it means you also lose your power to negotiate within the spaces within which you live. Because I know many working women, because of their position, they can say no to certain demands that are given by the community, given by their family members, because they have money that they can use as a bargaining power. But when it is lost, then it becomes something else. And then decision making. You know very well that when decisions that are made, for instance, by Mr. Getanda, and it's supposed to be about the community generally, I don't think Mr. Getanda would know what I would need when COVID-19 struck, in terms of even thinking that I could be faced with violence. I could be faced with a reproductive rights issue because he's not a woman. So he will not think of the nitty-gritties. He will look only at the bigger picture, and in the bigger picture, even though we are affected, but the smaller ones prevent us from realizing the bigger picture. So if you cannot get a woman to think in their own perspective and make decisions that are geared and purposely targeted to address their problems, then you lose the point. And because they're missing at the table of decision making, we found out that most of the targeted interventions that were given at national or even at international level did not address the needs of women. And that therefore calls for inclusion of women in decision making across the divide. And then simply put, is that COVID-19, like a crisis, like even when we had the post-election violence, even when we have the floods, women are the ones who are uniquely affected. And yet, their problems are not properly addressed. And even in the interventions that are made to respond, to the disaster situations, do not properly integrate their needs. And that is what happened with COVID. And will continue happening unless we understand the gendered nature of the society, or the way the gendered nature of the society creates discrimination and privileges that makes others to suffer and others to enjoy at the cost of others. And we want a society that believes in social justice, a society that promotes gender equality, and of course with the slogan, not leaving anyone behind. And when we say not leaving anyone behind, it means we have to bring both men and women, boys and girls, to move in the same direction for us to have a gender equal world. I don't know when we'll get it, but at least I know we are oranging the world. And very soon, Brian, we are going to sit at the same table, influencing policy. Thank you. And that was very short time.
Thank you very much for that presentation. You have awakened us to certain important things that we often overlook. The next presenter is Ronald Kihali, who will be presenting a paper entitled COVID-19 and Legal Education in Kenya, an Analysis. So welcome, Ronald.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sang. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I hope you're well. Okay. Thank you. So, I'm Ronald Kihali Omedo. Ronnie is fine. And I'll be presenting a paper that I did on my own, titled COVID-19 and Legal Education in Kenya. And I asked the question, opportunity or crisis? So you'd notice that the title is a bit changed. The book of abstracts shows something different, but I decided to twist it a little bit to show some perspective. Because I felt like, COVID-19 has brought so much deleterious effects in this country on legal education, but I felt like there was an opportunity that you could find from the impacts of COVID-19. So that informed my title, because I felt like we can look at COVID-19 from both perspectives or from both angles. So maybe just to move on. Oh yes, that's just a pictorial representation of legal education, how it has been happening. Somebody asked me why I'd used a white person instead of a black person as my presentation, but please don't think so much into that. It's just a random picture. So yes, maybe just before I look at the objectives, I decided to do this because I'm a student myself. When COVID-19 actually first came into this country, I was in my last year at my law faculty at Egerton University. And now, as I am undertaking my advocates training program at the Kenya School of Law, I'm still experiencing the same thing. So I felt like this is something I was really so much in touch with because I've experienced it firsthand. So now the objectives of my study, I'm looking at, of course, the impacts of the pandemic on legal education, which was one of the thematic areas, and I'm happy that that was one of the thematic areas because it offered an opportunity for students like us to tackle such kind of issues. Then, which actually informs the gist of my paper, I'm looking at the competing propositions with regards to impacts of COVID-19 on legal education. And basically what I mean by the competing propositions is that I've come up with two approaches that I feel we could deduce from the impacts of COVID-19 on legal education. And one is that COVID-19 has actually expanded the opportunities for technological innovation when it comes to legal education. So I felt like COVID-19 is not that bad at all. It has been a blessing in disguise because it has given us an opportunity to unearth some of those, growth opportunities that most of us were overlooking and we have been forced to explore because of COVID-19. And then my next proposition is the common proposition, which is that COVID-19 has actually been a nuisance. It has been a thorn in the flesh in legal education. And if you could have found a way to do away with it, then that would have been welcome. I also look at, of course, the proposition that reflects the current situation on legal education in this country. And then I look at how I can balance those two competing propositions in coming up with, of course, my conclusion and future implications. I also drew some comparison from other jurisdictions, most likely Australia and the United Kingdom, and you'd find that these experiences are not that different, they're not that dissimilar, but just, to give us an overview of some of the responses that these jurisdictions took when COVID-19 dawned. So in my introduction, this is just a PowerPoint presentation, but of course, the Word document is more fleshy. So in my introduction, I look at access to justice as a fundamental right under Article 48, and I wouldn't want to rehash this because it has been mentioned a number of times. I also look at the concept of access to lawyers in the society because I was trying to make sure that even as I look at the impact of COVID-19 on legal education, I should square it within the confines of access to justice. And so that's why I wanted to, bring some sort of comparison that, the people who are actually ensuring that this access to justice takes place, one of the key players are lawyers. And of course, for you to become a lawyer, you have to undergo this legal education, right from basic education, as you, of course, proceed to higher education. I also look at legal education as a socio-economic right under Article 43 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, which has also been stipulated a number of times. So again, I wouldn't want to belabor on that. And then finally, again, in my introduction, I look at ICT development, and I also look at the quality and equality of legal education that is being offered, which I found was, again, the bone of contention when you're talking about these issues to do with COVID-19. Because, again, it has actually exposed, and I'm going to be speaking about this in a few, but has exposed the kind of inequality that is actually present in legal education, in the current legal education dispensation. So just to move on, yes. So the right to legal education, a fundamental right. This was just a brief overview before I get into the arguments. It was just a brief overview of the right to legal education being a fundamental right. Of course, Article 43. And I also talk about the fact that there's an urgent need for well-trained and competent lawyers, because if lawyers are one of the key players in access to justice, then we cannot have incompetent lawyers enabling the society to access justice. That would be ironical and inimical. So my argument is that, and even if you look at the standards of professional practice and ethical conduct, my argument is that the society needs competent, diligent, well-trained, and well-skilled lawyers to enable people to be able to access justice. And so, by looking at that, I'm trying to actually bring the juxtaposition that there is a relationship between quality legal education and access to justice, that they are actually two related concepts, and that the promotion of one will lead to a corresponding promotion of the other. So just to move on to the next slide, because I'd like to make sure that I present everything but within the stipulated timelines. So, yes, so the next item, I now move on to talk about these impacts of the pandemic on legal education. And I begin by looking at the positive impacts that we have experienced. And this is just the way I'm using to show the first competing proposition that I had mentioned earlier, because I talked about the fact that the pandemic had actually been a blessing in disguise in one way or another. So I describe these positive impacts so that we can be able to see that the pandemic has, it has been bad, yeah, but not that bad. And so the first positive impact of the pandemic has been the development of the ICT industry in legal education. And as a student myself, I've seen this, of course, and I know we are all aware of them. We've seen these applications being used, these video conferencing tools, the Zoom and the Teams and the likes. And as you can see, it has forced us to be able to appreciate and to embrace these technological changes, because I'm quite sure that, okay, of course, this technology has been there even before the pandemic came in, but I'm quite sure that had it not been for the pandemic, we'd probably not be doing online learning at this stage right now. So you can see it has actually forced us to embrace these new technological innovations, because that is where we are headed, even without the pandemic itself. And again, this was mentioned earlier by a previous presenter, that learning goes on from wherever you are, and I actually agree with that. And I think that speaks to the efficiency of these technological innovations in legal, these technological innovations in the legal industry and in legal education. Because when I talk about efficiency here, what I'm simply trying to say is it's quite cumbersome. The traditional methods of learning are quite cumbersome. Of course, there's the physical learning where you have to hustle with traffic and you have to, spend a lot of money on the road for you to attend class. But with this online method of learning, at least we are finding out that it's quite efficient. Even as actually, as I'm attending this conference, my classes are going on at the Kenya School of Law. So, it's you can multitask. You don't have to restrict yourself to a physical classroom for you to receive education. Of course, I also talk about the aspect that it benefits working students. And This is also something I've been able to see. But of course, this would require good time management skills. In the sense that, of course, and here I look at majorly, there are those students who are not well off. And when they attend the Kenya School of Law or when they attend campuses, they want to make sure that they can have another means of earning income, So they may not be able even to afford the fees in that school. So they want to attend classes, and then in the afternoon they want to go and work. So you see, when you have physical studies, that is more or less difficult because you cannot attend class and at the same time purport to work. But with online learning or this new method of learning, you'd find that now you can work and you can study at the same time. Of course, that just requires good time management skills. I also look at mothers and expectant students, because these are actually people who we have also in school. You'd find that when you're there at the Kenya School of Law, not all of you are of the same age. There are those who are working mothers, there are those who are expectant, and it becomes a bit difficult for them to participate in education if learning is restricted to that classroom, if it is physical. Once it is online, it means that they can even, they do not necessarily have to go to school for them to receive that legal education. They can stay at home and they can as well be able to listen into those classes as they go on. Another positive impact that I was able to come up with, sorry, is that this method of online learning has actually prepared Kenyan students for any future disruptions. And I think we can all agree that when this pandemic dawned in this country, most of the law schools were very unprepared. I remember there were students who are currently undertaking the advocates training program. They had to wait, I don't know how many months before they could do the exams because the administration was left stranded. They had never experienced anything before like this. So you can see this has prepared us for any future disruptions so that in case something like this comes up, yes, thank you. In case something like this comes up in future, then we shall be well prepared and well endowed with our facilities and our resources to tackle such future disruptions. So what lesson have we learned? Because that was one of the thematic areas of this conference. What lessons are we learning from this COVID-19 pandemic? And so from this positive impact that I've described, the most important lesson that we can learn is that it's important to be flexible. That flexibility is actually very instrumental. You cannot stick to your old ways and expect to get the same results, So you have to be able to be flexible. You have to be able to adapt to any changes that come up in legal education. And again, another lesson that we have learned is that there is need for decentralization of learning and learning institutions. Just the previous slide. Again, the previous slide. Yeah. The positive impacts. The slide 7. Slide 6. Yes. So I'm actually on that last point, that COVID-19 has actually exposed the need for decentralization of learning and learning institutions. And again, the example I give here, because my scope was based on the Kenya School of Law, the best example again here would be the Kenya School of Law, because I remember, again, when the first time the pandemic actually dawned in this country, and I remember I was part of this. We were supposed to register for our classes for the advocates training program, and students who came from other counties other than Nairobi County found it difficult to register for the ATP program, because at that time I remember the president had actually imposed a nationwide curfew, and so a student who comes from Mombasa County could not have traveled in any way to Nairobi County to come and register for the ATP because there was a national policy that had been put in place to curb COVID-19, or somebody from Bungoma County, which is actually the county where I come from, or Makueni County, you see. So it was a bit problematic. And so it brings about the idea that there's need for decentralization of this school. There's no need to have just one school that crowds all the students and everybody has to go there and everybody has to study from there. There is need to make sure that at least even if it is in 3 cities or 5 counties, then that would be a bit better. And again, what saved, maybe just to add, what saved the Kenya School of Law at that time is that the president just in time lifted the nationwide curfew and people were able to register. So it was a bit problematic. The next slide, as I look at more positive impacts, and somebody talked about this again in the morning, is the aspect of, again, efficiency in legal education in terms of those class recordings. And this is something that I know has never been experienced at the Kenya School of Law because, once you attend class, or even any class, once you attend class, then that's it. If you're not attentive, you're not attentive. But again, with this advent of the pandemic and with the fact that we now have online learning, you'd find that you can record a class, or the administration can record a class, and after that class has been recorded, you can access it later. Like right now, that's what I'm doing because I'm attending the conference and I want to fully participate here. Once a class has taken place, I can go back later in the evening or at night, and I can actually access those class recordings, and they are very accurate. It's better than relying on somebody else to know what was taught. So the lesson that we can learn from there, it is very important for Kenya to embrace digitization of learning. But the only way that this digitization of learning can be very well embraced is by ensuring that we come up with relevant standards, policies, and guidelines. And again, I would give the example of Kenya School of Law because they also came up with very sound guidelines on online learning for both lecturers and students that were able to guide us even as we continue to wade into these new changes in legal education. So it is very fundamental. It is very important that we have these standards, these policies, and I think the government can do better in that regard. So moving on to the negative impacts of the pandemic, which now, of course, inform my second proposition. My second proposition that the pandemic has actually really deteriorated legal education in so many ways, and it is hoped that most of these impacts would be mitigated in one way or another. And the major negative impact that I look at on legal education is the exposure of the inequality that has always been prevalent in our legal education system. Thank you. In our legal education system. And this is something that is not foreign to us, the inequality that exists. And even my previous speakers have spoken about that, but I won't rehash on that, but maybe just to say, not everybody, for example, has access to the grid or electricity. Not everyone has access to these devices. Not everybody has access. Not everybody even has the funds to attend these schools. Even before the pandemic came in, not everybody could be able to access a law school. I have friends of mine who could not be able to get a legal education simply because they could not afford it. And it's quite sad. It's really sad, and I really wish the representative of the Council of Legal Education was still here because I'd planned to ask her. But, it exposes that inequality that is present in our education system. And again, of course, I bring the argument that what exists is formal equality, but we have no substantive equality in this country. We have very good laws, we have very sound laws, we have very progressive laws, 1 million laws. Right now, if you log into the Kenya Law Reports, you would find that there are so many laws there. But the question is, are they being implemented? Are they being actualized in any way? I'm being told that my time is almost up, so let me just finish. So I propose that the government and even us as a society, we should try as much as possible to promote substantive equality. We should make sure that this equality goes to the root of the system and not just in our formal laws. So that again brings us to the question whether legal education is based on meritocracy or affordability. Am I going to become a lawyer just because I can afford it? Or am I going to become a lawyer because I have merited to become a lawyer? So that kind of economic disparity is the major issue that is affecting legal education. It really prejudices the indigent. And as we know, one of the reasons why we have legal aid, in fact, the main reason is to assist the indigent in the society. So again, I talk about breach of Article 46 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, that of course stipulates that everybody has a right to access to goods and services of reasonable quality, and part of these services involve legal education services. So my major negative impact here is that there is a lack of structural efficiency in the legal education system. The points that I've talked about, there's a lack of structural efficiency in the legal education system, and a lot needs to be done in that regard. So just as I finish, of course, there's also the aspect of physical and mental health, which has been talked about before. Please take note of mental health, because a lot of people overlook that one. Many people are suffering mentally. Even when the pandemic came in, it really deteriorated that aspect. It is overlooked by many people, but it's a very important point. Of course, the aspects of gender-based violence has been talked about, so because of time, I won't go into that. The high costs of living, of affording law school, I've also talked about that. And so, I really want to go into other jurisdictions, because I can see my esteemed Dr. Ryan is here, but you can maybe access it much later, and I've tried to just draw comparisons between those two jurisdictions, just to show in a summary how they have tried to respond. But maybe just to summarize, these jurisdictions have tried to embrace online method of learning. They have tried to embrace this online method of learning to ensure that, you know, we try to embrace these new changes that are taking place right now. So in conclusion, and in the conclusion, I also offer future implications. I argue that COVID-19 has actually been both a crisis and an opportunity. And I didn't want to delve so much on one side, because I feel like there's always a way we can balance these arguments. And so I argue that there's a need to have a flexible and efficacious system for learning. And the only way we can achieve that is by coming up with the appropriate policies, standards, and guidelines needed so that we can be able to accommodate such new developments in legal education. So such an efficacious legal system would entail one that is efficient, it's flexible, it's equal, and cost-effective. Because as you can see, those attributes, they are not part of the characteristics of traditional learning. They're not. They are a mixture of both the traditional learning and the new method of learning, the online learning. So we should find a way to balance these two competing propositions to ensure that we have an efficacious system of legal education. So I think that's where I'll stop. I'm sorry for taking more time than was required. But basically, that was my paper. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure to be here. We are presenting our paper, Access to Justice in the Digital Age, Opportunities and Challenges. And we have combined an academic and practice-oriented approach due to the composition of our team. The article is co-authored by the founders of the Utatuzi Center, Josephine Wairimu. Unfortunately, she's not here today. Wanyuike Muiriri, I'm sorry, I'm a bit nervous, as you can see, and Erastus Njaga. They are seated there. And myself, Nicole Ahoya. I'm not among the founders of the Utatuzi Center. Utatuzi Center is a social enterprise with a focus on improving access to justice for the underserved through provision of virtual legal aid and alternative, respectively, online dispute resolution strategies. The founders of the Utatuzi Center have all a background in law, but also in tech and business. Me, myself, I'm a PhD researcher in anthropology, but I also have a background in law, and I work for an almost purely online advisory for refugees. And I do long-term and collaborative ethnographic research with and at the Utatuzi Center. and try to understand how legal technologies can leverage access to justice in Kenya. In comparison, what we have heard yesterday when e-courts, digital case management, etc. were addressed, our focus lies on what happens to the justice sector in Kenya when private justice providers enter the scene and provide justice based on an entrepreneurial model. However, I'd like to give a disclaimer. This paper is based on our very preliminary data and is more a think piece, and we will not provide recommendations. We will also try to keep it short to give, hopefully, enough time to hear your critical comments and respond to questions. So the development of private justice providers has been accelerated with the adoption of the SDGs, in which access to justice is seen as a crucial element of development in the goal 16.3. I don't have slides, I'm sorry, could you go back? So this is like a later part. Furthermore, to realize this goal, I'm citing from a UN meeting on sustainable development, technology-enabled legal empowerment strategies are seen as a solution to fast-track access to justice, particularly in developing countries, due to challenges in the field of affordability and accessibility. In Kenya, as it has been mentioned severally, and you all know, of course, it falls together with the inclusion of the Article 48 on access to justice to all in the Kenyan Constitution and the digital transformation strategy by the Kenyan judiciary, among other policies and developments. Informal mechanisms to access to justice are increasingly mentioned and implemented to close the justice gap. Chiefs and other authorities have, of course, always provided informal, for the lack of a better word, justice mechanisms, which makes it even more interesting to look at how these technology-based means of access to justice replace, converge, or conflict with existing informal mechanisms. The nexus of law and development is not a new one. From a Western-centric perspective, the use of uniform modern law was seen as a way to achieve social change in the 1960s. In the 1980s and 1990s, it was mainly the rule of law and the market economy which was presented as a key to achieve development. The third moment at the turn of the century focused particularly on human rights development as well as the market. However, what is particularly interesting is that more and more the term law or human rights becomes replaced with the concept of justice. Its use has become ubiquitous. I think it's due to the heterogeneous use of the concept, which on the one hand allows to frame a variety of different topics, what we also see based on the multitude of different topics discussed in this conference. But it is also challenging to really grasp and understand what different people understand as justice and how access to justice can be guaranteed to all. Furthermore, what is generally known as law tech or legal tech, but I prefer to call it justice tech, due to what I just mentioned before, is often premised on a deep geographic bias. We all know that technologies, algorithms, etc., often come with a strong racial bias. Up to now, these legal transplants in many jurisdictions in the South and more generally the justice digitalization nexus have been given very little attention in research. However, I am fascinated, and that is also the focus of my research, how Kenyans or Africans, or Kenyan or African justice entrepreneur, I call them, developed their own technologies and does not only rely on technologies developed and controlled by Western organizations. their struggle to make their social enterprise sustainable, but often makes them too justlers. I borrow this term from the East African branch of HIL, the Hague Institute of Innovation of Justice, and they have to compromise their visions due to a lack of funds, among other reasons. By understanding how justice entrepreneurs or justlers conceptualize, implement, and continuously adapt digital justice innovations to facilitate access to justice, we can hopefully gain a more comprehensive picture of the transformation of the justice sector and which opportunities but also challenges digital technologies provide. So in the following, Wanyoike will give you a more practice-centered approach, and he will give insights to the services offered at Utatuzi Center.
Thank you, Nicole. My name is Wanyoike, and Nicole has explained the background to which Utatuzi Center operates. Basically, that's her research area. Now I shall focus on the how. How does Utatuzi Center work? What are the tools, and so on and so forth. So, next slide, please. So basically, we are in the area of legal assistive technologies, to preface this, I'll say we are in the private sector rather than NGO, CSO, or the government, or the education component. So I guess we are unique in the conference from that angle. And our approach has been on trying to make legal technology, as Nicole has referred to as justice technology, and how it can improve access to justice in Kenya. And we do this through two areas, and that's the area that we focus on, which is the dispute resolution and virtual legal aid. So those are our two areas of focus, and that's what we'll be focusing on. Now, the key thing about legal technology, and basically any technology really, is that it must be focused on the end user at any particular stage of application. And as you were told earlier, sometimes we have a system that was developed, but it's not really being used by the correct user. We had the mentions of things like a mathematics training course being used by those students where we have weekly assignments, and an education person was complaining that that's not fitting their needs. Next slide, please. Now, when we go to know the design and delivery of the technological justice solutions, what are the areas what are the components that we consider as Utatuzi Center when we are implementing our solutions? You can see it in the slide provided. There's collaboration and integration, needs-based assessment, interactive design, training and awareness, monitoring and review, then the social justice outcomes. Are you actually doing something good with your technology, or is it just implementing it blindly per se? Next slide. Now, for universal design in legal technology to be accomplished, the end user has to be engaged on three fronts. The first, which is the basis, is does the end user really know their rights or their position? Are they aware? The next stage is availability. Are there barriers to the availability of these particular tools or technology? An example is, let's say, the virtual courts. If as a particular, let's say as a plaintiff representing yourself, all you have is a cyber cafe, and there are noises in that cyber cafe. Sometimes your money runs out in that cyber cafe. Are there barriers to you in your pursuit of justice? And finally, is affordability. Is it affordable really? Because if justice fails to meet any of the 3 points raised, then there's no justice there. It's good on paper, but when you come to the practice area of things, it's really not there. Next slide, please. Therefore, when we formed Utatuzi Center, we were guided by the assumption that all these inefficiencies that we've been mentioning around can be challenged, minimized, and even eliminated by combining technology to alternative dispute resolution strategy. And since we were founded to provide access to justice for those who need it the most, especially the small and medium enterprises and individuals, it's also critical to ensure that technology that was designed covers both costs, ease of use, and learning curve to it. And something I've noted is that sometimes there's a perception that if somebody is not really marginalized or it's not really poor in the starving sense of the word, they cannot be necessarily be locked out of justice. But we find there's a large number of people who are locked out of justice, don't necessarily being at the end of the spectrum. So we call this the underserved, not necessarily who are marginalized, but also underserved. Now we go to the components of Utatuzi Center's technology. It's basically simple. It's two components, the virtual legal aid and the online dispute resolution. Next slide, please. So there you can see our platform as it is. And this is now how the platform looks to somebody who just Googled us and found themselves on our website. We also have things like publications, but those are not the focus of this presentation. Next slide, please. So when we come now to the virtual legal aid, as you notice, there are a lot of people offering legal aid within this conference. Some as an institution, some institutions are a lot older, they are decades old, others are very young. Even I hear Egerton itself has a facility doing this. So what we do is we try to offer this virtually, which really cuts out of a lot of processes in between, a lot of inefficiencies. Instead of having to visit Utatuzi Center, you're now able to either use, there's a web portal, you can use SMS, you can reach us on social media, or you can send us an email. And whichever path you use, we are now able to guide you and assist you in your journey as you require the legal aid. So this is just a brief photo. Next slide, please. This is just a brief photo of the platform where you can, of the web portal for seeking legal aid. You provide your name, your phone number, and your email. Now, even on a phone, you're now able to come here, see, provide the details, attach, and the professional management system, there's a case management system, there are communication systems, and now there's a document storage and verification system. Each of these sections has been worked on as a separate module that come together now to provide an easy and trusted dispute management and dispute resolution system. Now, next slide, please. Here's an example of the web part where a dispute is handled.